Hello, everybody. Wait a couple minutes here to make sure everybody is here who wants to be here, and then we can get started. Should have brought myself a drink, but I did not. Fail. So, in general, what I wanted to continue working on today was last stream we sort of built out this template, and we just sort of built it as this static view here with some hard-coded information, particularly like this order information. And we just have this like sitting at the bottom of our routes file, just at this endpoint where we can sort of preview it and play around with it. And this is usually my general workflow when I'm building out like some sort of new template. I'll just build it in the browser and sort of like intentionally make sure that it is fake, in every way possible, like not putting it inside my auth middleware group and that sort of thing. And then I'll usually use TDD to sort of force myself to fix the template and pass real data to it and stuff like that, and put it in the right place and add the right authorization rules and stuff like that. So what I want to do today is take this template and kind of TDD it into something a little bit more real. I don't think we're going to focus on like this stuff today, but what I do want to focus on is this information, like this orders table, because my next sort of milestone for getting closer to being able to start using this for my own stuff is to make sure that I can drill into one of these orders and get information about it if something went wrong. So if someone tries to buy something and something doesn't work properly, I have like a nice way to be able to look at it in the back end here and help troubleshoot the problem and fix it for that person. So they're not left out in the cold spending money on something and me not having any idea that it didn't work or was broken. So let's start by writing a new test for this kind of make-believe endpoint and figuring out a few things there. So I'm going to add a new file to my features folder here. And what should we call it? Something like view orders test. I think that's fine. I might want to make this more specific later because we're going to probably have a test like view single order, but actually that's not so bad. If I call it view single order, then I think view orders is okay. So I'll put this in our feature directory and add a new test. Oh no, my snippet. What's going on? Sublime can be funky sometimes. So one of the places I usually like to start with a feature like this, where this can only be viewed by someone who has an account, is by starting with a test like guests cannot view a user's orders. Something like this. And I've been using, I need to come up with like a ubiquitous language here, but I've started using the word maker in a lot of places to refer to someone who creates and sells products through KiteTail. So I think I'm actually going to call this maker. Is there an artisan command for generating tests? I didn't know if there was. If there is, that's cool. Let's see. Artisan. Oh my goodness, there is a make test. I've been living in the past here. Steven, I don't know what KiteTail pricing is going to be like for sure. I did a podcast episode on it, Full Stack Radio episode something. We can see here it is episode 64. We talked a lot about pricing, and I kind of went into details about what I was thinking there, but it's still not totally decided. So if you're interested in listening to that discussion, I would check out that link. Okay, so now that we have this test, guests cannot view a maker's orders. Let's start by doing something like response equals this get, and we want to make a get request to the orders page. I'm going to use the named route here. Orders.index. And then we want to make some assertions, right? Like assert status, either a 401 or, a 401 is good in this case. And that'll basically be the whole test. So let's just run this. So we got a 200. So let's go ahead and take this route definition and move that up into our auth routes group. And I think I'm going to keep this up here. So in the template, you can see we have like orders, products, and discounts as kind of our main navigation. So I think I'm going to keep my routes organized in a similar way, just to kind of have a little bit of consistency and have some way of finding things. Let's go and run this again. Okay, so now we get an error unauthenticated. So let's make sure that we enable exception handling here, because we're relying on Laravel translating an exception into a 401 response. So by default, if you look at my base test case file, you can see that I disable exception handling for all my feature tests by default. So if an exception happens, I see it in PHP unit, because more often than not, that's the behavior that I want. But in certain cases, like this case, where we're relying on the exception handling in Laravel to sort of transform some exception into a specific type of response, we do want it turned on. So I have this helper called with exception handling that flips it back on. So we can say this, with exception handling, get the orders index route. Okay, so we got a 302. That actually makes sense. I think we actually do want this to be a 302. And we actually want to assert that we get redirected to the login page. So where is the login page located? So it's just at login, and it's named login. I'd like to change this to like auth.login eventually. So for now, I'm just going to rely on the actual full route path here. Okay, so that test is passing now. So now that this test is passing, I want to do one small refactoring, which is to stop relying on a closure route here and introduce a controller. So let's, since we're green, we can do some work here to kind of get this going. So let's start by running artisan make controller orders controller. And before we do anything, since we're trying to do pure refactoring here, we should run the tests again and make sure that that change didn't break anything, and it didn't. So now that we have the orders controller, I'm going to add a method called index, and I'm going to have this index method return the same view. Run the test again, still green. And now we can do like the final quick swap here of replacing this closure with the orders controller and index method, and we should still be green. And we are. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is make sure that a maker can view a list of their orders. So let's add a test for that. Ugh. So this time tab worked, whereas previously enter worked. A maker can view a list of their orders. So we're going to want to hit the same endpoint, but we don't want to have exception handling this time, so we get better errors if anything goes wrong. We want to be acting as some user, though. So we know up here we're going to want to have a user. And we want to make sure that we get 200 back. And probably make some other assertions too about like the contents of the view, right? So before we do that, I want to get this setup working first. Let's see if we can just get this 200 working and kind of go from there. So undefined variable user. So here we're going to have a user factory user class create. Whoop, 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 whoop. Make sure that's imported. Okay, no such table users. So we got to pull in our database migrations trait. Okay, so this test is passing now, but we're going to want to be able to make some assertions about making sure that we can see their orders, right? So there's a couple ways that you can do this, and I want to talk a little bit about the downfalls of a common approach that I see. And it's not so much that there's huge downfalls, but I don't prefer to do it in the way I'm going to discuss. And then an alternative way that I've been using a lot more lately that I actually prefer a lot. So one thing that we might do is go ahead and create some orders for this user, right? So this is a little bit messy because they're actually called purchases in the system, and in most places when I talk about viewing a purchase, I'm thinking about like the end user who bought it, viewing information about their purchase. But for a maker, they think of a purchase as an order that someone placed, which is something that someone purchased. So again, I'm probably going to have to think hard about some of this language. But ultimately, what we want to be able to do here is basically create a product and create a purchase and see kind of what happens. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this setup code here, and we'll simplify it a little bit. So we don't need to worry about the name. Well, let's do it two ways. So we could do something like create a product with a name, create a purchase for that product. And if we go ahead and look at the view, you can see like there's some information that we want to be able to see possibly, right? So we might want to name the product, create some purchases with all sorts of information here. And then what we would do probably, right, is go down and do things like response, assert, see, test driven Laravel, assert, see someone's email address. So if we look at the purchases table here, you can see there's an email field. So if we had something like email, like john@example.com, we could assert that we see john@example.com. Maybe we want to assert, that we see like the price that somebody paid. So in this case, this person paid $59. So we could verify, that we see 5900, something like that. So this would be one way to write a test like this. And probably what you'd end up doing is creating a couple more purchases, right? Because you want to make sure that it's showing like a list, and making some more assertions about different data like this. Personally, I am not a huge fan of making assertions about contents of a template, because a lot of the time stuff in this template can change for reasons that, in my opinion, shouldn't cause a test to fail. So say, for example, someone on the design team decided, okay, I don't think we want to show the cents. We just want to show 69 now. And now all of a sudden this assertion about 59.00 showing up would fail. And you have to ask yourself, well, should that fail? Do I really care that fails? The data is still correct, right? It's still the right order. We're still seeing the proper order. It's just being presented in a slightly different way. Where do you sort of draw the line between making assertions about the system behaving correctly versus making assertions about sort of superficial aesthetic template or design choices? I mean, at the most extreme example, would you ever write a test to verify that the currency here shows up using a lighter text color than the amount? You know what I mean? Is that something worth asserting against? It could be if there's some behavior in your system where this could conditionally be two different colors based on some data, then maybe you do want to make an assertion about something like that. But generally, this is just a superficial design thing, right? It just really doesn't matter. So the way that I prefer to make assertions about endpoints like this that really just return a template and provide the template with some data, all I really care about is that I used the right data in the template. I made the right data available. I can show you an example of when that's more important. So say this is maybe what I would actually do. Okay, I'll just show you what I actually do, and then we can talk about some of the benefits of that and why it lets me make assertions about what really matters and doesn't get caught up in things that don't matter. So I wouldn't even create a product name. I do care about the user ID, but I don't care about the product name. I care that the purchase is associated with the right product, but I literally don't care about anything else. So I'd probably go and put all this on one line. And I care that there's like a few purchases that we can see in the view, right? So I might have like 3 purchases here, like purchase A, purchase B, purchase C. And then rather than making an assertion that the template is showing certain data, what I really care more about is that the template was provided with the right data. And then the front-end developers on the team, or the designers, or whoever making whatever decisions about how something should be displayed, have the right data to display. And they can format it or decorate it or do whatever they want. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they were given the right bag of data. That's kind of the way I've been thinking about it lately. It's kind of like thinking about asserting against JSON versus asserting against HTML. Like with JSON, it's just data. I'm just making sure that the response comes back with the right data. What the consumer of my API does with that data, I don't really care. I just care that I gave them the right thing, and I didn't give them anything they weren't supposed to see, for example. So here's what I would do. With Laravel, if we dump this response object, you'll see, after I go and import all these factories, that what we have here, way up at the top, is an instance of a class called test response, which is a little decorator for Laravel's actual response, and that's what provides us with kind of these useful helpers like assert status, for example. One thing that you'll notice if you look at test response is we can actually get the base response from the test response, which gives us the Illuminate HTTP response. And if we look at Illuminate HTTP response, you can see that in this response trait, we have this public property called original. And there's also a get original content method that just returns that if you're uncomfortable accessing the public property. But this is interesting, and I'll show you why. So if you jump back to the view orders test, and we dump response original, and the test response, if you look here in get, it just proxies everything through to the base response. So we can basically treat it like a regular Illuminate HTTP response. So if we dump this original, it's kind of interesting because what we get is actually an instance of Illuminate view. And that is what was returned from the controller. That's this same object. So it's not HTML, it's not a response, it's literally an object in the system. I'll show you something else that's cool. If we look at Illuminate view, here's the class that we're returning. Check out this interesting method here. Get data. Let's see what happens if we call dd response original get data. Let's start with a fresh terminal here. So we get an empty array. Okay, that's not that interesting, right? When we get just an empty array. The reason that I don't use the multiple create thing, like creating 3 purchases instead of 3 variables, we'll get into. So anyways, we get back an empty array. But look what happens if when I return this view, I do something like foo bar, and now dump this. Oh, interesting. We are able to access the data that was bound to the view in the controller directly as real kind of code, not like as HTML junk that we have to parse and look through. So, say we wanted to do something like, say we wanted to get the purchases that were passed through to the view. We could do something like purchases equals response original get data, then access the purchases key, right? Assuming that there is like a purchases key. In this case, because of how this works, I think we're going to get an error like an undefined offset. Undefined index purchases. So we have no purchases index here, right? So what if we did something like purchases equals, empty array, and then run this again. Okay, so it passes because we get the purchases back, and if we DD these purchases, it's an empty array. So now that we have access to the actual data that was passed back to us from the controller attached to the view, we can do interesting things like this: assert true, purchases contains purchase A, for example, right? To make sure that it contains, that list of purchases passed to the view contains the first purchase that we created. We can make sure it contains A, B, and C. Now this is all going to fail because like this purchases thing is an array, not a collection, right? So let's just run this and see. So now again, error call the member function contains on array. Okay, so now we know that we like at least need to return like a collection here. So now if we run it, we get failed asserting that false is true on line 42. So the empty collection did not contain purchase A. So now we can think to ourselves, okay, well, what's the easiest way to get a collection back with the view that does contain this purchase? So the easiest way that I can think of is just to do something like purchase all, right? This will just get every purchase from the database. So if we run this, we'll see that now this is actually green, right? Which is awesome. So getting to the point about like making the multiple factory purchase classes at once versus creating multiple here. If we were to do that, we would instead have had something like this, right? We could say like, what would we call it? I don't know. Maybe this would be purchases, and we'd create 3 of them, comment this out, and then down here, we'd have to rename this to something like, view purchases or something, like the purchases that came back from the view. And then here, we'd have to say view purchases contains, and then we'd have to say like purchases 0, purchases 1, and purchases 2. And if we did this right, it should still pass. So because of the fact that I want to verify that the right purchases are all there, you end up having to do like basically just as much work. And I find like having to come up with these 2 different variable names and using like the array access stuff here, just kind of uglier to me than having 3 purchases kind of labeled purchase A, purchase B, and purchase C. And being able to assert against all of them this way. So that works. Now, you'll probably also notice like, okay, yeah, it's working, but like we're missing a crucial thing here. We're just getting back every single purchase in the system. A maker should only be able to see the purchases that they actually own, right? Like the orders that were actually made to them. In this case, say we were to do something like, let's copy all 3 of these lines for a second, paste them here, and we'll call this other user, and we'll say other user's products, and this will be other user, long lines, but what can you do? And then we'll make this other user's purchase, and that'll be other user's product ID. So now if we have 3 purchases that belong to this user and then 1 purchase that belongs to another user, we would want to be able to make an assertion, something like this, right? Like this, assert false, that purchases contains other user's purchase. So if we run this, this is going to fail because we returned all the purchases, not just the purchases belonging to a certain user. So, another reason that I don't like to do the thing where we create multiple purchases at the same time is because I really dislike setting up my tests in such a way that I can come up with another way to get it to pass that doesn't prove what I really want it to prove. And I'll show you an example. So say in our orders controller, instead of returning purchases all, we returned purchase take 3 get. So this is going to get the first 3 purchases from the system. All of a sudden, this is going to pass because of the fact, that we left out the other person's purchase. And this, you might think this is really stupid, kind of silly. Why would you write this code? But it's not completely ridiculous because you might be doing pagination or something, right? It's not totally impossible that you might get a false positive passing test in a case related to limits and stuff like that. So what I like to do instead is kind of mix this one up into this list so that they're not grouped with all user A's purchases and then all user B's purchases. And that means that that's a way that we can get this implementation to fail, but the correct implementation should still pass, if that makes sense. So what I would do now is take all this code, and probably what I would do is I would move this stuff up here. So I'd have product and other users' product. And then I would have purchase A, purchase B, purchase C, and then I would kind of sneak other users' purchase in the middle here. And now if we run this is going to fail on line 48 because we tried to make sure that it contained purchase C, and it doesn't contain purchase C because that's the 4th purchase, and we're limiting it to 3. So now we can get this to pass by using the proper implementation, right? Auth user, let's see, user.php. So we already have a purchases relationship, so we can just say purchases. And now if we run this test, we get a mystifying failure, but we'll figure it out. Auth not found. Okay, so let's go ahead and import that facade. Run the test again, and we're back to green. So that is how I like to test stuff related to the view. Now, there's downsides to this, of course, right? Which is, that even though this test is currently passing, when we actually look at the orders page, it's obviously not showing the right data because if we look at the orders index blade.php file, we weren't forced to use those orders in the template, right? So we can have fake data here and the tests are still going to pass. My opinion is that this is not something that you really need to stress about or feel bad about. To me, when I'm building a template, I'm in the HTML file or the Blade file here, refreshing the browser, checking things, making sure things are kind of looking the way that I want them to look. And it's my job as the person creating the template to make sure that I'm taking the data that was given to me and using it in the way that I want to use it, So what this test does is it proves that I'm giving the person working on the template the right data set and kind of giving them the freedom to use that data set in whatever way that they want. So this does a very good job of testing the behavior of my system and making sure that the actual app logic is correct, that it's doing the things that it's supposed to be doing. And then what we're doing in the template is really just taking the data that we've now proved is the correct data and using it in whatever way that we want to use it. An example that I've thought of in the past is sometimes I look at Twitter, for example, right? And Twitter has some things that show up, this who to follow thing in the sidebar or this trends thing. And I look at this and I think this is kind of just a widget, right? It's just a widget that Twitter has in their app that they can kind of just drop in places where they want to drop it in. Does it make sense to really write a test for the home page that verifies that the who to follow thing shows up and that it shows the right people? Probably not. To me, it makes more sense to test that whatever kind of code is responsible for generating this works and just make that widget available to the people who could consume it and drop it in wherever they kind of want to drop it in. As long as we've proved that this thing works properly, people should feel like they can use it in different places now. You know what I mean? So that's how I kind of think about testing views too. I just think about like giving the right data to the view, testing that that data is right, making sure I test any of the important conditions, like making sure that we don't see someone else's purchases and that we only see our own. And then from there, I feel confident that like as long as the person working on the template, is accessing the orders variable, there's no way for them to have someone else's orders mixed in there or any problems or bugs that we actually are really worried about being able to prove don't happen, right? Someone would have to literally go in here and do like purchase all or like write a query in the template to make sure that they get stuff they're not supposed to get. As long as we sort of like have a general understanding that people are only going to use the data passed to the view and not reach out and grab global stuff, then I'm not too worried about it. And I like it because it lets us make like really strong assertions about data instead of kind of loosey-goosey assertions about markup, especially markup that can fluctuate and change a lot. Like here I can actually verify that purchase A, has a specific amount and a specific product title. If I'm asserting against the template, it's very hard for me to say like, okay, assert that I see Heroicons and assert that I see test-driven Laravel, but assert that Heroicons was $69 and assert that test-driven Laravel was $139. You have to start doing all sorts of XPath selectors and making sure that like, as long as I'm looking for text inside of this one DOM element, then I know it's kind of scoped or whatever. And every time you do something like that, where you're relying on those like sort of CSS selectors and stuff in your tests, you're more and more and more coupled to the template and the design, and your tests are more brittle and more likely to break for superficial reasons. So to me, I would rather just work directly with the data and think about testing this sort of stuff as if it's almost a JSON API. And the data that comes back from the response here is the same as like the JSON that I would get back from an API response. So, now that we kind of have that working, I want to show you some cool stuff that I've been experimenting with lately that could clean up some of this stuff a little bit. So I think this looks sort of gross, like having to go response, original, get data, purchases. It would be cool if we could just do like response, like data, purchases, and just get those right away. I mean, in general, it sort of like makes me sad that I have to create this purchases variable just to do all these assertions. Like if I wanted to get rid of that, I'd have to go ahead and like inline this in this super kind of nasty way, right? Now all of a sudden you have these really long lines and it's obviously really noisy, right? It's hard to just look at this and instantly tell like what the hell am I trying to do? So lately I've been playing around with this idea of like making it easier to get direct access to the data associated with a view response. And I'll show you kind of the way that I've done that. So if we add a protected function here called setup and make sure we call our parent setup function, we can add a macro to the test response. So if you look, the test response class is macroable, which means we can add methods to it at runtime, which is really cool. So here we could do something like test response macro data function key return this original get data key, something like that. If we run this again, it should be mostly passing except for namespacing things, which are the bane of my existence every time I get an unexpected test failure. And now we can like shorten all this stuff to just be response data purchases, which is kind of slick. So undefined index key, oh, derp. Don't want a string there, we want the actual key. Run this again, and now we're green. So that looks a little bit nicer than it did before, right? Undo just so we can kind of see the before and after. So we have this kind of nastiness, and we're able to shorten it down to that, which is a little bit more readable, which I think is nice. So that's cool. Another thing that I've been playing with is, if you look at the Illuminate Support Collection class, this is the class that we're interacting with here when we say that the purchases list contains a specific purchase. the collection class is macroable too, so we can add stuff to this. So this is something that like I didn't really realize, like I never really like paid attention to this approach or noticed this is a cool idea until sometime last year. But basically this idea of like being able to bake assertions into objects. So I can take this response and assert that its status is 200, right? Like that's really cool compared to this assert equals, 200 response status. That's kind of like the alternative way to write that. This is just kind of cool. It's also kind of nice because you could do some interesting things like provide better default error messages and stuff because you have some more context here. If this failed, you would just get failed asserting that 404 equals 200. In this case, you could have a custom message on the test response. Like Taylor might have even done this. I don't know. Let's find out. If we look at assert status, yeah, see expected status code status, but received that. So it's a little bit more clear, a little bit better information. I've also been using this approach a lot with fakes. So I might have like a payment gateway. I actually probably have a real one here that you can see. So you can see I have like assert charge count on like my fake credit card gateway. So then in a test, like purchasing products test, you can see I do things credit gateway assert charge count 1. So assert 1 charge was made to the credit card gateway, and assert that this account, assert $49 was charged and it was passed to the Stripe account. I do the same thing with my dispatching webhooks. So that's pretty cool. So, yeah. What I've been playing with lately is this idea of even baking assertions into the collection class. And since you can do this like just in your test suite using macroable at runtime, you're not really carrying around this extra assertion baggage. Instead, you're just kind of doing it in your test. So if say we wanted to like have some syntax that looked like this. Instead of saying assert true contains, what if we could just say assert contains? That's pretty sweet. I don't know. I think that looks awesome. So let's make that possible. So let's do collection. And in this case, it's an eloquent collection. So we'll say eloquent collection macro assert contains function item return. No, sorry, not return. We want to say assert, which is PHP units assert class. Assert true. This contains item. So let's just run this and see if that worked. Still green. So we can get rid of that. We can duplicate this 3 times for B and C. Get rid of these 2. Run this again. Still green. Sweet. And now this assert false, we can replace that call with maybe something like assert not contains this other user's purchase, right? It'd be cool if that was possible. So let's do that. So let's just duplicate this macro. Assert not contains, and then we'll say assert false. Cool. So let's run this. Green. Delete. Green. Awesome. So this is how I would go about testing this orders view and making sure that we're creating it with all the right data and stuff. And now the next thing that I would do is basically go through and drive out this actual table with real data just by making use of the data that I've now tested is getting passed correctly. So now we might hop into the actual orders index view. And then instead of looping over, this range, we could just loop over purchases as purchase. And I don't know if there's going to be much here. There's a shit ton because of my database seeding. So it'd be nice to do some pagination here probably, but we can save that for another day. There's actually another thing that we could probably test here, but let's kind of see this first. Actually, the way the seeders work, it might not be that interesting. Let's do it as a test first. So let's, I'm going to have 2 tests here because it makes it a little bit clearer. So we'll say a maker can only view, let's rename this, a maker can only view a list of their own orders. So this test is all about proving that the orders that get passed in are the ones that belong to them and are not the ones that belong to anyone else. And then what I want to do is write another test that says orders are sorted from newest to oldest. So this is another test that would be super fucking hard to write asserting against HTML. It'd be so gross. But if we can assert against real data, it can be a lot easier. So I'm not going to worry about the other user or the other user's product. Instead, we're going to have these 3 purchases, and we'll clean this up a little bit so we can do this a little bit nicer. And we'll say that the created at timestamp for each one of these is going to be some carbon thing. And similar to what we did with the other test, where we were kind of mixing shit up in a weird order to make sure that we were getting that our test was working the way that we want it to work, I'm going to intentionally like put this in a foobar order too to prove that we're actually doing the sort call. So let's say that this one was created 3 days ago. Let's say this one was created. Does that work? Probably not. Let's say -3 days. That probably works. -1 day. And like -4 days. Let's just like dump one of these and see if my imagination is correct when it comes to what carbon can do. If we import carbon, that would be helpful. So the created at is, yeah, that's right. What is the shortcut in Sublime to multiply cursor into a new line at same character? Do you mean like if I have this here and I want to extend it like that? This one is Shift Control down, extends the cursor vertically. And then I use Command D to select the next instance of whatever I have highlighted. Okay, so these dates are getting created in this weird order, right? So this is the oldest one. This is the newest one. And then this one is like kind of in the middle. So you know what? I would actually be tempted to mix these up even more. So this should be first, this should be second, and this should be third. So let's think about how we want to make an assertion about that. So I think what we want to do is, one way that you could do this, that I would probably do because I think it's kind of neat and clever, is to do something like this. Assert equals, then have an array here where we have it in the right order. So we can say like purchase B ID, purchase C ID, purchase A ID, and then response data purchases pluck ID. We might have to do values all. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the purchases from the view and flattening them into like a very simple structure of just the IDs, so we can compare those IDs and make sure that they get passed back in the order that we want. So failed asserting that the two arrays are equal. So we got 2, 3, 1. We got 1, 2, 3, and we expected 2, 3, 1. So let's go back to orders controller, purchases, and we'll go latest get. And with any luck, that should pass now, and it does. And the whole suite passes. So here we have kind of two tests. One, making sure that a maker can only view their own orders. So making sure if we mix someone else's one up in that list, that it doesn't get sent to the view. And this one just makes sure that the orders are always returned in the order from the newest order to the oldest order. So now, in the template, we can sort of just loop through these in the order given to us by the controller and not really fret that anything weird is happening. So, like, one other benefit to, not benefit, but one other thing to keep in mind when you're trying to write tests, like using this sort of approach of making assertions about the view data directly, is that you gain a lot more confidence from these tests the more logic you can push behind the view. So if we hadn't done this way, right? Say we just had lists set to order purchases or auth user purchases, and then we decided, like, here, we wanted to do like, what is it? Sort by descending. You could say like sort by descending created at. If we wanted to bake this logic into the template, well, now we don't really have a good way to assert against this logic. So if it's important for us to verify that the system is showing the orders from newest to oldest, rather than writing a test that makes assertions about the HTML to verify that, the way that I would prefer to verify that is by treating this as sort of a smell or a signal that's telling me, hey, you have too much logic in your template. You should try and push some of that back into the controller or back layers even further from the controller so that your templates can be as dumb as possible. They're just like data, and they don't have to think about, how to sort that data or anything like that. It's just given to you, ready to go, and you don't have to do anything fancy with it. So that's just like another thing to sort of think about if you want to work on writing this stuff this way. So now if we're looping over these purchases, I'm going to go to my database seeder and make this a little bit more straightforward. So we create between 100 and 500 purchases there, 100 and 500. So let's simplify all these 100 and 500 things to just be like rand, like 1 to 5. And then where's the purchases? So I'm going to also override the created at. We want to use faker to specify like a random date. Am I using that in here anywhere? No. So let's just create a gross faker instance up here. So we can say faker equals new faker. I think it's like factory, right? I could say fully qualified namespace faker factory. And then down here, let's go to the PHP faker docs for a second. Figure out how to create a date. Okay, so we probably want date time between. It seems fine. Okay. Faker. Date time between, and we'll just specify the first value. So we'll say like maybe minus 6 months. So any purchases were made at some random time between 6 months ago and today. And let's just run the seeder again. We messed something up somewhere. Oh, darn it. Commas. If only we were writing Ruby. Call undefined method datetime between. Really? That seems weird. Does not seem weird that the faker documentation would list a date time between option, but have it not exist. Okay, that's sad. Faker factory. Okay, yep. We have to call factory create. I knew I was doing something wrong. It's not new faker factory. It's faker factory create. Let's see if that helps. Okay, now we're good. All right. Okay. Okay. So we did a loop here, and we're getting like a sane number of orders now. So we can assume that hidden underneath each one of these is a real order. So let's go ahead and spit out some data here. So let's do like the purchase date. Let's see, does purchase have a formatted date attribute or anything? Not right now. So for now, we'll bake that into the template. That's one thing I tend to not mind doing in the template is like date formatting. So we'll start with created at formats YMD. Is that right? I can never remember. Yeah, seems fine. And we'll get the person's email. They're all kind of the same crap, which is not the end of the world either. We could probably override that with faker if we want. Why don't we do that? It's kind of fun. So if we look down where we create purchases, let's kind of just find all of those. Then down here we can say email. It's going to be faker. I think it's safe email. Logged out again. And that'll give us an email that if we accidentally send an email to it, we'll be okay. So it's using the same one for each one. Duh. So that sucks. So let's do function use faker. And we might actually get a faker instance in this function passed to us by Laravel, honestly. But this will work too. Column email cannot be null. If we return a value here, that would help. Here we go. Okay, so now we got some stuff. And now we're starting to see one of the reasons why we might prefer to use a real table for this instead of a trying to handcraft it ourselves, because it's going to be really painful to get the alignment right. But that's something that I can address later on. And then here we're going to have the product name. So let's see, is that possible to get? Yeah, we can already get the product name. Purchase, product name. So there's the products. And everything is going to be USD for now, so that'll be hard-coded. But we do want to get the purchase price. So we have amount in dollars. So that seems perfect. And it's just going to be amount underscore in underscore dollars. Yeah, tables are definitely good for displaying tabular data. The only reason I wanted to avoid it in this case was because I want to make this whole row clickable. And because of the super strict structure of table HTML, I can't put an A tag like around a table row. So instead what I would have to do is use some weird JavaScript, or what I'm thinking now that I'll have to experiment with is using like display table for like a link. So if we have this div, say I do something like style equals display table, and then no, that's not right. This will be table row. And then here we'll have a div with like a style equals display. Table. Trying to see how easily can I make a table without using actual table markup so that I can use an anchor tag. And then here, I think we want to say, fuck you. All right. Style equals display. Table cell. If this is going to solve my problem, then I'll probably just make some helpers, some utilities for this. Yeah, I mean, that will probably be the right way to go, is using like pseudo table. And then that way I can still make this whole thing like an href or like an anchor tag. And with any luck, now I can hover anywhere on the table row and make that a link. So that's probably the approach that I'm going to ultimately go, but I'm going to undo all that for now. And that'll, seems like the only way I'll be able to get the best of both worlds. So let's throw a $sign in front of that. And it's not pretty because of the alignment, but yeah, otherwise it's pretty good. We're showing like real orders and stuff. And now I'm getting closer to being able to get to this screen, which is the one that I really want to get to, which is, you know, just being able to make sure that I can go and view someone's order information and find out if the webhook got delivered properly and do things like send them their receipt or get them a link to their receipt and any of that sort of interesting stuff. So yeah, we've been going for an hour, so I think it's a good time to wrap it up. Hopefully that was interesting. All the stuff we talked about today, by the way, related to like all this testing stuff with testing stuff that's in the view and view data and stuff. This kind of content is all basically lifted directly from my test-driven Laravel course. One of the more recent lessons I was going through basically this exact same thing. So if you are interested in more stuff like that, especially more stuff that's structured in a more, you know, formally educational way, and you haven't checked out the test-driven Laravel course, definitely go check it out at testdrivenlaravel.com and learn more about it. And either way, I'll see everyone that can make it on Friday for yet another stream where we'll probably work on building out that other order template. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.